Hello, and welcome to The Exchange, a series of insightful conversations about culture, community, and corporate life with some of the top leaders from Wells Fargo. I am your host, Marco Hansel, and today we're going to talk about the essence of leadership as a diverse leader. I want to give a warm welcome to my guest, Lashonda Fusilier, Wendy Oliver, and Eduardo Queen. Thank you all for joining us. First, want to kick off just so we can let the audience know a little bit about yourselves, who you are, and also one special question here that's going to play right into the topic for today. 1 to 3 words to describe how you are feeling right now. So, as an example, I might say I'm Marco, I'm the host of the show, and I'm feeling nervous and excited and joyful, and then we'll move on. So, starting off, let's kick off with Lashonda. You're giving us a bright smile right now.
I appreciate that curveball,
All
Marco.
right.
So I am Lashonda Fugelair. I have been with Wells Fargo for the last 16 years, and I lead our multinational corporation subsidiary vertical within CIB. And I am feeling extremely enthusiastic and empowered.
Awesome. Thank you, Lashonda. All right, Wendy.
Hi, Marco. Thank you for spending time with Ashanta, Ed, and I today to discuss leadership from a diverse perspective. My name is Wendy Oliver. I've been with Wells Fargo about 5 years. I lead a team responsible for control supporting Wells Fargo commercial capital. I am feeling proud, excited, and ready to get going.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. All right, and Eddie.
Alrighty, Eddie Queen here. I lead Financial Health Engagement Platform, part of our Consumer Data and Engagement Platform group under Sandra Noodleman. I've been in the bank for about 9 years, most of the time in the wealth management business. I'm feeling rested as I just came back from vacation and excited about this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Eddie. So the reason why I asked about those feelings, right, is just recognizing we're all here in the same room, the same meeting, well, at least the same virtual room, and the same meeting for the same topic, right, all from the same company. And we've got a range of different emotionalities that are coming in here. And the thought process around diversity that's so interesting to me is in this one event, there's a diverse range of different emotions, different experiences that we're having in the same event. Now imagine spanning that out to all the different cultural events that have happened through our life, from our upbringing and different events that have changed based on our gender, based on our race, or based on our nationality. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's like what does that do not only to our day to day, but how does that change in diversity actually affect how we approach ourselves as leaders? So let's get into this conversation. I want to start off with one sort of framework conversation. We'll just start with a framework question here on what makes a good leader, just in general. And Eddie, why don't you kick us off with this?
Okay, what makes a good leader? I think first of all, passion. I think I personally look for people who believe in what they're doing. It's not just clinical. Um, I think that you want decisiveness, people who can set the direction and make the calls to lead us down the right path. And be ready that many of the decisions are not going to be right, but that's okay, right? We move and we adjust and we course correct. So I think passion, decisiveness. I think I look for people also who encourage open conversations, direct,
Mhm.
constructive, open conversations. I think we have an obligation to have people speak up, right? I had
Yeah.
someone who worked for me who used to say, "Don't watch me fail. If you're seeing something that I'm not, it's your obligation to speak up and to make
Mhm.
sure that we are all thinking through that." And I think the last one would be accountability, right? A leader who actually holds people accountable and makes that clear.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I love that teamwork view of if you see something happening, like speak up, like that. It becomes this shared responsibility. That's great. Let's segue another one. So, what makes a good leader? Wendy.
I think I agree with everything that Eddie just stated there. I think also I would add visionary.
Mm,
A leader has to be courageous and resilient. And I think that's very important because, especially as a diverse leader, you have to be courageous and deliberate and intentional. I think it's also important to show empathy, clear thinking. For a diverse leader, one of the things that I pride myself on and that I try to do all the time from a leadership perspective is to explain the possibilities for other diverse employees. One of the things I think from a leadership perspective is that we have to be able to be the change that we
mhm.
want to see in the organization and in others. So I would add those to Eddie's list.
Thank you, Wendy. And you're segueing right into the next question. But I want to give Lashana a chance to answer this. What makes a good leader? And then we'll loop it into our theme here.
Okay, I'll try not to take us off track since Wendy was doing a great segue, but I'll just add to that because I agree with everything that's been said. I would add being able to assess talent and
Yeah.
being able to inspire and motivate people to achieve their best. Because I feel like a big challenge we have sometimes in the business is we think the top performer is going to be the best leader, and that is not
Mhm.
necessarily the case. Some people are just amazing individual performers, but they're not necessarily an ideal leader. And I feel like a leader needs to be able to identify people's talents and leverage them to the best, to the fullest extent, and be able to inspire and motivate people to reach their highest and greatest potential.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So I want to circle back to what Wendy was mentioning is the differences in the roles for her as a diverse leader, right? And what it means to be a leader when you have that context placed around your leadership and also the perception of other people around what it means to be a diverse leader. So I want to sort of move back into this, and maybe Eddie, if you want to pick this up, of how is your leadership approach any different or influenced by your cultural identity, by the fact that you are a diverse leader?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not sure that I can perfectly precisely answer it. Right? I think we're all a result of our experiences and how we grew up. I grew up in Brazil, right? My family kind of has different backgrounds, but I grew up in Brazil. That's the culture I come from, and there's no doubt that that influences me. But there's a lot of other stuff, right? That influences my way of working with people and leading. But no doubt it has an impact, right? I'm not sure, Mark, that I can precisely tell you exactly how.
Yeah. Well, I love you bringing that up. It's like there's this wide range of things that we're experiencing in our lives that's changing the way that we view things and also changing the way that people even view us, right? So that obviously is influencing us in every single moment of our lives in a wide range of ways. So all the results of how we end up showing up actually is a result of our cultural identity, which is so intriguing. I love to hear some more opinions on that. Wendy, since you brought up this topic originally, why don't you expand on that for us?
Sure. I would have answered this question completely different 10 years ago.
Mm, mm,
But today I answer that question saying it's 100%, ingrained in my cultural identity with the way that I lead today. Early on in my career, I bought into the concept that we're more alike than different. So
mm,
what does that mean? So everyone would say that I bought into it. That was the answer always. We're more alike than different. But when you do that, you kind of bring the part of yourself to work that's alike the majority. And the part of yourself
mm,
that's different, it stays at home, right? And when you
mm.
do that, because you think that that's the only part of yourself that's accepted, the part that's like the majority.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, as I grew more and as I learned more and as I got more confident as a leader, I realized that we made a mistake. We should have never said we're more alike than different because we should focus. The way you drive inclusion is focusing on that difference. Where are the areas where we're not the same, and making it okay and creating the space for all employees to bring that part of themselves to work as well. So I think for me, today I'm authentic. I bring my whole self to work, but I also have to be prepared to know that everyone is not ready for you to bring your whole self to work all the time. Everyone is not ready for you to bring that culture part of who you are as well. And what you have to do is, once again, that's where you have to be courageous. You have to be deliberate, and you have to make sure. And this is one of the things when I was did some research on you, Marco, on everyone is not ready for your concept of proactive honesty. Everyone is not ready for candor, and especially when it comes from a woman of color. So being prepared to deal with that as well. But for me, 100% is my culture is ingrained with who I am as a leader.
Oh man, Wendy, so many nuggets there that I just want to make sure that everyone really caught what you said about the difference between focusing in on our similarities versus celebrating our differences. Right? Like I always
Correct.
imagine like what if you worked at a company where it was just you, right? And you and another you and another you and another you, and they all thought the same and they all had the same opinions and they
Mhm.
had the same thoughts. You literally would have nothing to learn, right? And
Yeah,
and if you
exactly.
you look at the different variations of that when people come into and create companies that don't have that level of diversity, they're literally creating these echo chambers of the sameness,
Exactly.
and that sameness is
Exactly.
preventing the ability to grow. So I
But
love, oh man.
yeah, and that concept, right? That concept, we all, well, I know I used to say it, right? We're more alike than different. And
Hmm.
everyone embraces that, and they think that's a good thing to say that, right?
Yeah,
But we do have differences, and let's not sweep those differences under the rug. Let's bring them
hmm,
out, and let's welcome them and invite them to the room as well. And when you do
yeah,
that, you're driving inclusion, and you're bringing everyone into the room, and you bring your whole self to work. And until
I
we do
love
Yeah,
that.
Wendy,
that, then yeah.
Yeah, no,
sorry,
I
Wendy,
love
I
that.
can I
So
ask you a
got a little
question?
emotional, excited over here. I was just going to
go
say,
ahead.
you made some, I agree, there are nuggets there, and you made some really good points about, how it evolves over time, right? When you
Mhm.
first walk into the room, when you're new to the institution, I think you find yourself, or maybe I found myself self-conforming more as you figure out what the environment
Mhm.
is and what the environment is receptive toward. And then as you get farther into your career and you get more established and you have more credibility, at least I did, started to feel more comfortable sharing more and bringing more. And then I think just the environment has changed over time, especially over the last, call it 18 months, where it's even more accepted and even encouraged to bring your whole self and to bring those differences. But your point about not everyone is ready to accept and embrace your candor is absolutely spot on. So you've got to read the audience, you've got to read the room. And then part of being a leader, I think, is meeting people where they are. As I talked about earlier, bringing out the best in people. Sometimes you've got to be the bigger person. You've got to understand where they are and what they need and how to meet them there to achieve your common goals.
Shonda, I'd love to dig into that a little bit deeper because you sounded like what you were describing is there are some challenges with figuring out the way to show up as that full version of you or that full diversity and sort of highlighting your differences. So could you speak a little bit more into some of those challenges and how you've been able to navigate that?
Sure. Personally speaking, I would say I'm probably the biggest chameleon there is. And what I struggle with are those conversations with people about, well, you can't change who you are. You've got to be you. You can't be a better anyone else than being yourself. And I
Yeah.
agree with that. But I do feel like over time, especially starting out, I really learned how to blend, how to assimilate. And that was key to being successful. As I think about just in the early days, coming from a bit more of a low income family. This is not a who has been the most disadvantaged type situation, but coming from a low income family, being in different environments where sometimes you're the only one like yourself, the only woman, the only person of color, the only Black woman. You find yourself in an environment where your experiences are different. And so you can either choose to be on the outside looking in, or you can start to embrace these other experiences and perspectives and learn from others. And I did a lot of that. And I actually think it has benefited me over time because it gave me the opportunity to kind of meet people, to get to know them, to engage with them, to have them start to embrace and accept me. And then over time, I had the opportunity to share more. Do I feel like sharing myself immediately and all of the details would have been widely accepted immediately? Not necessarily. Do I feel like I needed to conform a little bit sometimes? I think that is the case. And we've had a lot of conversations in different sessions internally recently about, are you giving up your authentic self or your authenticity?
Mhm.
And I've heard and used the team example where you play on a team, you wear the uniform of the team, so you wear, you have the right attire and you behave a certain way. There are certain expectations, but you still get to bring, certain aspects of yourself and certain characteristics and introduce different unique aspects of your personality, but in a way that is conforming with the team so that you can still help accomplish the broader goals. I think it is a delicate dance and it's much more of an art than a science, is what I'd say.
Interesting. Wow, I love that. I love to hear. And if you want to give some opinions on that, because there was a lot to unpack there that I think love your perspective on.
For me, it's that balance now. I think you do become more courageous the more senior you are in your career, just simple things. And I think it's hard to find that balance between, ensuring. One of the great things that Wells Fargo is doing right now is giving the space for these conversations, is giving the space to make sure that everyone is heard and understood as it relates to this topic. So I agree with everything that was just stated, but I think at the same time, we have to make sure that one of the things that I'm trying to make sure, a story when early in my career, we used to go to lunch together every day with three other colleagues of mine. And one day I would drive and one day they would drive. And I can recall on the days that I would drive, I would be rushing back to my car and trying to change the radio station because I like Drake, right? And the music was playing, and I didn't want to offend anyone. So I was rushing because they were going to be in my space to make sure I turned to a top 100 pop radio station or something like that. But I noticed that when one of the particular people in the group would drive, he would be listening to Rush Limbaugh or something like that, that would say things that were offensive to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he never changed his station to create a more
Mm-hmm.
inclusive environment for me. And I suffered through that, didn't say anything. I was early in my career. Today, I wouldn't do that, right? Today, I would speak up and I would make my voice heard. So I agree with what was just stated. Sometimes we have to do things to build that team. What I did in that situation to build that team is because if I didn't go to lunch anymore, then I wouldn't be considered a team player, right? If I said something at that time, I didn't know how it would be accepted. But today, I would take that chance and I would take that risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope diverse individuals earlier in their career will be courageous and have a voice early on and not just suffer through that because they think there's no place for it. And I hope what Wells Fargo is doing will open the door so we can get to that point.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that share, Wendy. I want to unpack one thing that you said in there that I think is so valuable is this concept of what you had said earlier, being that change. Like at some point, we're either taking the road that's going to allow us to fit in, or we're actually highlighting those differences and creating the disruption, right? That disruption that may actually be the very thing that sparks that connectivity, right? So I love that point, and I love Eddie. I want to bring you into this. Do you have any thoughts on this subject and how you sort of dealt with those challenges or witnessed any of those challenges in your life?
Yeah, I actually was trying to jump in earlier, Marco, to ask Wendy a question. And sorry to put you on the spot, Wendy, but a little bit in line with what LaShonda was saying. Aren't those two truths? We have more in common than not, and we should celebrate our differences. I think those two things are true in my mind, right? And I think a little bit like, yes, there's a give and take, right? I think we all adjust and assimilate a little bit. I think that the challenge is how we don't suppress, things that are natural to us and are instinctive to us, and that in some way over time this hurts, right? If you start suppressing things that would have naturally come out, that stuff is what causes, hurt and pain in my mind. And I think we have to figure out a way to kind of get these things out, right, in a constructive way, in a way that helps people kind of see what's going on. But I actually think that both are true. I do believe that we have more in common than we have in terms of differences, and we should celebrate our differences and make the most of them.
Yeah, Eddie, I agree with you. I think they're both true, but I think where the mistake that we've made is just focusing on the things that we have in common,
And that, got it,
and
got
Mhm.
and,
it.
and not focusing on the differences that's there and celebrating those
Hmm.
as well. So normally, for me, normally early on when you had that discussion, it ended there. We have more things in common than
Hmm.
not. And that was
Yeah.
normally the end of the discussion. And we
Got
focused on
it.
that. But I think if we would have spent the time to focus on those differences, because for me, I think that we're not going to have a true diversity and inclusion until we get the inclusion piece right. And to me, focusing on those differences drives the inclusion, such
Mhm.
as the story I just told with the radio, right? I did not feel inclusive when I rode with my colleague that had on a radio station that was offensive to me. Whereas what I did is I went out of my way to change my station to create an inclusive environment for him. That same wasn't happening for me. And I think understanding those differences and where we're different is what will
Ooh.
drive a true inclusive environment.
Oh man, Wendy, I love you bringing that up because it just reminded me that the distinction you're making, and want to make sure everyone sees this, is that actually part of what was missing in the other person who's playing the stuff that isn't being sensitive to you is recognizing those differences. Right? It's like
Hmm.
the inability to recognize those differences isn't even saying, "Oh, I wonder how Wendy feels right now." Right? It's like so
Yeah.
that inquisition and that understanding of the separation is actually what allows us to be more included. That's oh man, such a
And
nugget. So when
Marco,
you
I think that's culture, right? I think that's our culture. From me, from an African American standpoint, growing up, your mom and your grandma always you're comfortable, right?
yeah.
You always went out of your way to drive that inclusion for others. You
Mhm.
gave up things for yourself to drive that. And so culturally, I ran in my car to make sure that I was creating that inclusion for my colleague. And so
Mhm.
I think that's a
Yeah,
part of our culture.
awesome. That's awesome.
Things. I agree with you about it being a part of our culture. I also think it's a function of us being more in the minority group, right? Where
Hmm.
the three of them are probably going to be comfortable with his Rush Limbaugh. Nobody else is uncomfortable. And so he's not thinking about our perspective. Whereas when you go to your car, you're concerned that all three of them are not going to appreciate your style of music. So I think that gave the impression that you need to conform, as I talked about earlier, the need to assimilate. And on the positive side, I would say I feel like that is less common these days. And I
Yeah.
have always found the part I've loved the most is it's kind of what Eddie said, where you're not suppressing your piece, but not only not suppressing it, but that you are exposing other people to it. So I've always taken an interest in people. I'm just genuinely interested in conversation and wanted to hear about, like, why do you listen to Rush Limbaugh and what do you find interesting there? But I also want to talk about Drake. And I also want to know, are you aware of Drake? You know how many people like Drake? You know how much he sold? I love bringing the two conversations together. And while we will find that maybe we have great differences in terms of what we're actually listening to, we all feel pretty strong about what we like, right? And I will
Yeah.
get in the car and ask, is that a pop station? Is that like a 13-year-old kid's pop station that you have why is it, what drives your interest here? And I feel like it brings people together. Not everyone embraces it all the time, but I find that typically when we talk, people love to talk about themselves, as I love to talk in general, you can see right
Hmm.
now. But as you give people an opportunity to tell you about themselves, then eventually they'll start to listen, most of the time start to listen as you talk about yourself. And I've learned so much from my diverse colleagues. I say diverse, I don't think of myself as diverse, I think of them as diverse from me. And I feel like they've learned a lot from me as well over time. I hear them retelling my stories sometimes, and it's a little badge of honor. Like, you didn't know that before you met me.
Yeah. But I think that's great. What you're saying is that, and now today, when I think about that story, am I going to rush to change my station from listening to Drake? Because Drake is still relevant today as he was 10 years ago in my
Right.
book,
Uh-huh.
right? Uh,
Yeah.
so, am I going to? No, I'm not. I'm going to do exactly what you just said. I'm going to educate. Yep, I can make a hell of a decision in the boardroom, but I can also come to my car and listen to Drake and why. Why
Hmm.
is that okay for me to be my whole self, because I do like Drake, but I deliver the hell out of everything I do every day, all day. It doesn't take away from that. It gives you an opportunity to know who I am. You know, when someone asked me a question once, it's like, Wendy, how have you survived in corporate America for so long? And I said, hey, look, I learned how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And a part of that was his story. I was uncomfortable going to work going to lunch with him. I wrote with him to listen to Rush, but I became comfortable with it to be a part of the team.
Mm.
I love
Wow.
that comment about being uncomfortable or being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Almost probably to an extreme from my perspective. I've gotten to the point where sometimes I kind of appreciate being the only woman or the only person of color or the only Black woman in the room. Now we've got to change that, right? I know we are working toward that. But the one thing I say about that is, you know what, when we all leave the room, you know, there's 7 of us from Wells Fargo that come to meet with this client. When we leave, they will remember which one is LaShonda. Now, there were 3 Johns in the room and 2 Toms, but they will remember which one was LaShonda because she was the only woman and the only woman of color. When we show up again, they'll know which one was me. But we do need to make changes. You know, I need them to be a little bit more confused next time we come in. I need them to actually remember me for me. But to your point about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, it has become a way of life, and hopefully that won't be over the long term. But there are times where I think it's kind of worked to my advantage.
Yeah.
Well, I
Well,
have to
I'd
say
love
though,
to.
it's less today than it used to be. I'm sorry, Marco.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we got a little bit of a delay. I want to take a moment to just pin on that because it sounds like one of the things we're moving into is a little bit of a solutionizing here, right? Like how do we actually create these environments? And both of you are commenting on this opportunity to actually push against the grain, lean into our curiosity about our differences, right? And using that as an opportunity to show up maybe exactly like a stereotype in some way, but then something's different, right? We're like, oh, well, yeah, you may think this about me, but yeah, I'm also like a big boss, right? Like, and now it's causing that challenge. What are some other ways that we look to create more diversity and inclusion and things that we can encourage that in these environments that we're in? What are some short-term things that we could do that are real easy and anybody could do right now? And Eddie, I want to throw this to you if you have anything.
I would go with what Lashana just said, right? And my wife is actually superb at this. When you're genuine, right, and you bring up topics and questions, and you're genuinely curious about, others, uh, and you share about yourself, that stuff flows naturally, and
Yeah.
people will pick up if it's genuine. If you have a constructive goal behind it, if you're not trying to poke, if you're not, you know what I mean, if it's genuine and authentic, that's the best way, I think, is to bring it in conversation.
Thank you
And
for
I think
sharing.
Wendy hit on it earlier when she said, you know, I execute, I get things done. You know, I can make decisions in the boardroom. So when you build those relationships and people like you know, they can relate to you, they enjoy being around you, but then they also see that you can get things done. There's nothing they can hold against you. And I think we all know that, you know, we are not just representing ourselves when we're the only one in the room or only a couple in the group. They're forming opinions around us. We think about our opinions on us and forming opinions on kind of our group, our race as a whole. And there is some responsibility here, I think, for us to represent well and change some of the stereotypes, some of the misconceptions, some of those perceptions that they may have or preconceived notions. So I think by building those relationships, but also by executing, we do our part to help change the future.
I love that. And I want to hit on what you said about those stereotypes and those preconceived notions, and just recognizing for a moment that every single one of us has a concept around all these different identities, right? A concept around what it means to be a male, what it means to be from a certain city, what it means to be a certain height. So the beauty about what is happening here and why I love you speaking into diving to the questioning side is that if we became more curious about these different stories that we've created, we might actually learn a lot and sort of expand our view of what it means to be an African American or what it means to be a Latino. So it's not that there's a broken thing that people have those judgments. It's just, well, what is your judgment telling you? What is that story telling you about me that's not actually reflective in who I am? So I love that as a solution there. Um, Wendy, do you have some thoughts on that? It sounds like we've got a really good set of solutions here. I want to hear some more.
Yeah. But I think just piggybacking on what you just stated, I worked outside of the U.S. for about 6 years. So so I was the CRO for a bank when I was with GE in Lafayette, and when I moved to Eastern Europe, and I was there, I moved single by myself. And they said, "Hey, look, you probably won't see anyone of color in a year in the country." I was like, "That's impossible, right?" Because it was Soviet bloc until '97, and so I didn't know what to expect. And so when I got there, I was a little bit nervous. I had cultural training, and it was the best work experience that I've ever had in my life. And when I thought about it years later, I understood why. It was because most of the, and when I was there for 3.5 years, I literally saw, about 5 people of color, and that's in it, not just African American, the entire time I was in the country. And what made it such a great work experience, I think, is because I was not judged by being a woman or being an African American woman. It was by my vision. It was by my leadership and my knowledge and know-how. It wasn't all the stereotypes and all the preconceived notions were not there. Culturally, their challenge was if you were Russian or if you were Latvian. That was what they pulled back and forth between day to day. Not being African American because there were no black people, no people of, so therefore it didn't exist. And it made a pure work environment where I could just focus on the work, not whether or not someone was going to take what I said in that room or when I was decisive or just as passionate as my male colleagues that I was an angry black woman or any of that. That concept wasn't understood. And it was such a great work environment. So it's all about your cultural norms, right? And what people perceive you to be and how those biases are developed to begin with. In Lafayette, there hadn't been an opportunity to develop those biases because they never had people of color in that country.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, I have a question for Wendy.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a question for Wendy. To that point, it's about your biases, the cultural norms, what you're aware of. They weren't aware really of race or thoughtful around your race. They, had their own internal challenges. But being born and raised in the US, I feel like I am acutely aware of race, probably more so than people in any other country in the world. Did you have any biases yourself that you needed to deal with or address, given you're raised here in America where race is relevant, going into their world, into their country where race was not?
I don't know that I had any biases to deal with. I think I just had to level set myself in terms of how to lead, people that were from a different culture with different norms and different beliefs. So I think there was some level setting that I had to consistently do because, Latvians are much meeker and Russians are much more outspoken. So I had a team of both. So figuring out how to manage that and how not to quote unquote use what others from other countries perceive to a U.S. dominance, right? So if anything, I think I had to work with that to make sure that I wasn't coming in as an American that thought she knew it all, right? And so dialing some of that back, I think is what I had to do in order to deal with maybe some of my biases or perceived biases.
Interesting.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I love this concept of you bringing in the view of international, that like even what might be a cultural perception in one country is not shared in another country, right? So like then we can carry through these different concepts as if it's a universal problem, and that in and of itself is like a proof in the pudding that it's possible for people to have different perceptions, because if they haven't created the concept, then they don't have that perception. So how do we unravel that even more? Like what do we do to shift those perceptions?
I think it's something that we have to, because when I left Lafayette, I moved to Amsterdam and I worked and lived there for 3 years. And their norms were totally different. Whereas, race was on the table. Being a woman was on the table. I was always the only woman only African American in any meetings. Whereas in Latvia, I wasn't always the only woman in meetings because there were a lot of women senior leaders in banking. So what those norms were as well, which were totally different. And there are different challenges. And so I think no matter where we are in the world, we have some sort of challenges that we have to figure out. How do we find a way to create those? How do we find a way to make it acceptable to have these differences? And how do we find a way to make them useful in terms of how we execute and live our lives daily?
So what are some of those solutions, Eddie? What do you think? Love to hear from you, Eddie, on creating that more diverse and inclusive future.
I don't know that there's a silver bullet here, Marco. I think what you described, Wendy, it's interesting when you described it, right? I grew up in Brazil. I'm not saying that Brazil is great from a race standpoint, but it's definitely different in the US. And it's hard for me to even have this conversation, even though I've been here in the US for 15 years. I don't feel like I truly understand this topic deeply and that I can speak credibly to it, to be very honest with you, because I didn't grow up here. So there's a lot that is in this topic that I don't feel I really fully understand and grasp. But there's a little bit of what you were describing, Wendy. That's how I kind of came to the US. A little blind and a bit naive to this, right? And I feel like over time, it was becoming more clear to me, those challenges and landmines. And I think that the more we can get to the world the way you described in your experience, where what matters is the work, and that these are people that you're working with and they have value to add. They have different perspectives, and it's our job as leaders to kind of ensure an inclusive environment that everybody can contribute. I think the more we can get to that, the better.
Good. I'm
Sorry,
sure you
Marco,
got
I
some
keep
good.
trying to take your job. I want to be the moderator here because I have a
See,
1,000 questions on
you're
these
doing a
good
great job.
comments. And I don't want to move us away from, being solutions oriented, but I wanted to ask Eddie, my follow on was, coming to the US, as you mentioned, not having the same perspective of kind of race and the role it plays in this culture. What has your experience been since you arrived here? Because obviously there's your perception, but then you arrive here. How do people perceive you? Because they see you as a man of color, whether that was on your radar or not. So how has that influenced your experience?
It's so interesting. It's so interesting you asked this, Rhonda. I joined a different bank, right, in New York first. That was my first 8 years here. And that was a much more diverse culture, to be honest, and much more international in nature, right? So I almost kind of I didn't even perceive that I was different for those years. It was okay, that was it. And I moved to St. Louis and to join the wealth management business, the WFA business. And to be honest, that's where it started to become clear to me that I was different. And it's been a process since, right? To realize that people maybe were looking at me in a different way. And I was a little bit maybe blind to it, right? And it took me some time to realize that. And I try to be honest. I don't know if that's the right answer, to be honest, but I try to not allow my brain to function that way. Don't think that people may look at you differently. Every time that it comes in, I say, turn it off. Don't go there. What matters is the work, and the people that you're working with, and we should treat everybody the same. And that's kind of how I try to deal with it in my own mind. And again, I don't know if that's right. That's just how I ended up dealing with it.
Interesting.
So I'll share my 2 cents on this and then I will wrap up my comments. But Eddie, what you said you try to do is where I think I need to go, because I was thinking about Wendy's experience when she was in Latvia, and I would have come in thinking the exact opposite of what you came to the US thinking and what you're saying we should be thinking, where people aren't looking at me differently. I fit in just like everyone else. I immediately come into every situation thinking I'm different and people are looking at me differently. And I think that's one of the reasons I think I naturally gravitate toward trying to find some of the similarities and figuring out how we can bridge the gap. But to your question, Marco, about what are some of the solutions and how do we get past that, I do think we all need to get to a point where we're not automatically thinking that people are looking at us differently and automatically looking at everyone differently. but our experiences, create biases which aren't necessarily negative or positive, but they're real. And so we have to address those. But I think I start on the far end of the spectrum, assuming that people are looking at me differently. So personally, as I think about what I can do differently, is maybe not start so far on that end of the spectrum and really try to understand where people are coming from and their perspective without being so presumptuous coming into the conversation.
Interesting. Yeah, I love this idea because I think, earlier we had talked about, and I think Eddie brought up, like, what if it's both, right? That we're celebrating these differences and we also have a lot of similarities. And something that you're bringing up that I think is so powerful, I know from my own personal experience, I sort of charged in with yep, I'm pretty much going to be the only black guy in this room for this tech fundraise, for this, Web 2.0 conference. And as a result, I always use that as sort of the feeling we said of like, yeah, I'm representing. Like I feel special. Like this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to show up with that bigness so that I can create a different view for what people are thinking, and at the same time carrying Eddie's view of, oh, but I know I'm not different. I know that's just your perception. I'm different in all these wonderfully unique ways, but not different in some of the ways that you may think about me from a negative perspective. And like so, there's this interesting duality that we can carry and still sort of experience both. So I want to think about the benefits, right? I know we just spoke into a little bit. I said it sort of fueled me to move forward as a diverse leader. What do you all think are some of the benefits of being a diverse leader that sets you apart? Wendy, why don't you grab this one?
So some of the benefits of being a diverse leader and sets me aside. I think one of the benefits of being a diverse leader for me personally is what I kind of hit on earlier. It's about expanding the possibilities, being that person that shows up in the room and to help break down any of those stereotypes that are out there, to be that role model for other people that look like me, and to also be that support person that's there if there's a discussion that needs to be had, and be that voice in the room. I think one of the benefits also is back to what LaShonda stated. I'm normally remembered because I'm one of the only few in the room, but I hope like heck. I don't want to be the only one in the room. I don't want to be the only two or the only three. I want to see a bunch of people that look like me in the room with the same opportunities that I have. So I think one of the benefits, one, it is here at Wells Fargo today, right? We're at a point where we are recognizing diverse talent, and we're given this platform that we're on today. We're given a platform to try to help, educate and bring those along, and help uncover those biases, and also biases of our own, because we all have biases. They're just different. So I think it's for me, it's more around servant leadership and the ability to give back and the ability to change the numbers in the room.
Wow. I love that, and I love what you mentioned there too, Wendy. That you're sort of hitting on the fact that you showing up is also a diverse representation for people that look like you, right? It's like,
Yes.
so there's this beautiful opportunity where that even the concepts that are being shaped about what we as whatever identity we have can actually show up as are actually being influenced by seeing counters to some of the stories that we might have adopted. So that
That's
is
right.
beautiful. So I'd love to take a quick moment here. We're about to wrap up. I want to hear some takeaways. If you were to share one major nugget on why not only being a diverse leader is so unique to you, or what it means to you, and what you think that other people should take away about diversity and leadership, what would it be? Let's have you kick it off, Lashonda.
I knew I'd get to go first. Um, so a couple things, especially if I think about just what we've discussed today. One of my key takeaways, and Eddie brought it out, and I think you summed it up perfectly, Marco, as I bit off different pieces from Wendy, was just that conundrum of not thinking, knowing you're not different, people are just perceiving you differently, but then coming into the room knowing that I'm different and automatically thinking that I'm different. So trying to balance those two, where it seems like almost an oxymoron, or it's conflicting messages in my head, but both really do coexist. and having to navigate both of those, I think is one of the biggest challenges for me as a diverse leader. But I would say, as a diverse leader, there are far more benefits than there are challenges. Wendy listed a good summary of those, and it's everything from what we can do for those coming behind us in terms of paving the way and creating, or I guess addressing any of the misconceptions about who we are as a people, creating more opportunity for others through recruiting and bringing them into the business. But then there's also a lot that I take away as a diverse leader in the room with others who are different than I am. I feel like I learn as much as I share. I learn more than I share because I'm one person and there are usually so many others that are different than I am. And I feel like all of that wraps up into what I feel like is a really good diverse leadership experience. And then the last thing around it, I'd say, is back to my early comment about recognizing talent. And recognizing talent doesn't always look exactly like everyone else who's always been in the room. So being able to bring in more diverse talent who look differently, think differently, and help us escape groupthink.
Yes, break the echo chamber. I love it. I love it. Eddie, love to hear your share.
Sure. I think to me, it's a lot about what you said, LaShawn, about the folks that are coming behind us. Right. I think as a diverse leader, I think the most important contribution we can have is to behave differently and to look at talent in a different way and to give people opportunity based on their competencies and their skills and their abilities and not on anything else. Right. And I think that is the most important and biggest challenge that we have, not just in the company, but I think in the industry and in the country.
Thank you, Eddie. And Wendy, why don't you close us out?
All right. We've talked a lot today about, some of the things that's happened historically. I've given some examples, but I want to close out by saying I think things are improving. The fact that we're having this dialogue right now here today means that progress is being made. Inclusion and equity are the anchors of any effective diversity strategy, but we must strive for more than just a great strategy. As leaders, we must not only acknowledge our biases, but we must be deliberate and intentional about defining equalizers in our daily interactions. And if we don't get that right, then I don't think we'll have a sustainable, diverse impact on our business.
That's a mic drop. I had an outro planned and everything, but the diverse experience we're having here just took it away and allowed it to be. So I want to thank all of the guests here, LaShonda, Wendy, Eddie. Thank you all for spending this time sharing your views on diversity. It's been an amazing conversation. I hope that everyone else has enjoyed it and gathered a lot of information around what it means to be a diverse leader, and maybe just changing some of your perspective about what curiosity could actually do in your views of how somebody thinks differently and how that could potentially impact your organization and impact you in a positive way. Thank you all.
You're awesome. Thank you, Marco. Nice meeting you.
Thanks, Mark.
Awesome.